Okay, so we're just gone 4 o'clock then. Welcome everybody to Fire Safety in the Inventory Clerk. With myself, Stuart Walker. I'm the chair of the AIIC, and Michelle White and hopefully Graham at some point from Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service. I'm so pleased they've joined us today. It's really, really good of them. And judging by the amount of sign-ups we've had, this is going to be a very, very popular webinar. The agenda today then, so we'll do a little bit of housekeeping shortly. We'll launch straight into the presentation with Michelle. She's kindly said that she'll take some questions at the end of the presentation. So if you've got those burning, pun intended, questions, then please do feel free to put them into the chat box and we'll answer them as we go. I'll be doing a tiny bit on the business case for the inventory clerk to carry alarms and to fit alarms. And then I'll be covering a few of our upcoming events because there's some interesting stuff there, which I hope you'll enjoy. So why are we doing this? Well, first of all, it's about giving a little bit of member value. Personally, the reason I wanted to do fire safety first is that my best friend from school joined the fire service and spent 25 years as a firefighter. And whenever he comes round to my house, he always tests the alarms and he always says, I need more. So, you know, if somebody with that amount of experience is that keen on alarms, then frankly, I'm in. So I think it's a really important topic for us to cover. This is a bit of a, I guess, a test event. What we're doing is we've got a series of webinars that we're going to be producing for members. And really, we're testing out the different formats, different times, different days to see what people want. So if you do have any ideas, please do feedback to us what topics you want or what are the best times and days for you. And we'll adjust as we go on. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping then. We are recording, so if you don't want to appear on the recording at a later date, then please do switch off your cameras. We will distribute the slide deck later on, so you'll have all of the information at your fingertips. And please do add any questions to the chat panel as we go on, because if you're anything like me, I think of something during a presentation and then completely forget it. And then when they get to Q&As, I can't remember what burning question I had. And please, microphones on mute, please, just in case any sound gets through. Okay, so that's entirely enough from me. The first thing I'm going to do before I do anything is I am hopefully going to launch a poll. So this is just a quick test to see where we think we all are in terms of fire safety. There we go. So hopefully you can see that. And perhaps if you'd be kind enough to vote. And while you're voting, I'd just like to say thank you very much for all taking the time out of your day to come along and watch today's presentation. It really is important to us because when we put these things on, we don't know how many people are going to turn up. So having you guys here is really, really good. So thank you. Okay, so we've got 100% answers there. So let's just share the results. As you can see there, so we've got one person out of 25 who's got excellent fire knowledge. I suspect that's Michelle. And
I didn't vote.
Oh, all right, then I'll let you off. Quite a lot of us are in the so-so category, and I'd probably put myself in that, even though it's my kind of hobby horse. When we were setting this up and I had a conversation with Michelle, just as an aside, she taught me something that I didn't know, which was brilliant. So I'm hoping today we'll fill in a few of those blanks for you. Okay, that's absolutely enough from me. Let's go on then to Michelle. I will set the first slide, and over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Stuart. Good afternoon, everybody. So my name's Michelle. I work for Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Service and have done for the past 7 years. I started in community fire safety and then moved over to what we call the dark side, which is protection, which is the legislation. In the protection department, I'm a business support advisor, and what we try to do is support and advise and give guidance to mainly commercial premises and businesses, so they're aware of their fire safety responsibilities in regards to the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005. Next slide, please. So Stuart asked me to put this together, and I had a kind of brief, and I tried to put together as much information as I could. Stuart tweaked it a bit for me because I wasn't quite sure whether I was hitting the brief or not. But hopefully you'll find this informative. As Stuart said, there is a chat there. If you've got the questions, then obviously we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. So the aims and objectives is just to inform the landlords, property managers, and any stakeholders about their responsibilities regarding fire safety. There are legal requirements. There have been some new amendments to the smoke and carbon monoxide regulations. We can let you know what the enforcement and penalties are. Um, I'm hopefully got some practical compliance guidance for you, and just highlight the related legislation that goes with all of the smoke and carbon monoxide legislation as well. And next slide, please. So the legal requirements, as I mentioned, the smoke and carbon monoxide alarm regulations came in October 2015, which required landlords to, private landlords basically, to have smoke alarms in their premises or properties that they were renting out. Then they changed the smoke and carbon monoxide alarm amendment, which came into force in 2022. And from that date, all relevant, so it's the social housing now as well, and unlicensed HMOs must ensure a smoke alarm is equipped on each story of their home where there is a room, and which is used as a living accommodation. So if there's like a townhouse and they've got a floor that's got a bathroom on it, it must have a smoke detector on that floor. Um, they should be fitted and also linked to the British Standard 5839 Part 6. Now you'll find that in the ADB Part B, and this is a legal requirement in the private rented sector, as I mentioned, since 2015. Next slide, please. You must also make sure that they've got a carbon monoxide alarm, which is used as living accommodation. And this is where it's changed. It used to be a solid fuel appliance. Now it's a fixed combustion appliance, because before gas boilers weren't included in the regulations. Now they are. So you must make sure that a carbon monoxide monitor is in that room. You must ensure that all the smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms are repaired, or replaced once informed and found that they are faulty. There is no actual time, but it does say as soon as reasonably practical. They are a bit woolly. They're not actually saying there's a specific time, but basically, as soon as that landlord has been informed that there is a problem with the either the carbon monoxide or the smoke detector, they must look into actually fixing it. These requirements are enforced by your local authorities, and they can impose a fine of up to £5,000 where a landlord has failed to comply with the remedial notice. Um, with the smoke alarms, when they putting them in, it's make sure, if you're going into premises, that you've got like a large complex sort of like outlay, where people are living. Just make sure they've got enough alarms. They they should be, really, as I mentioned before, interlinked as well, because what you don't want is someone in one part of the house, they can hear the alarm, and then when you test it, and they're if it's a bigger property and they're upstairs, they might not be able to hear it. So you've got to make sure that if you've got them installed, people can hear them. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the Fire Safety Order and the Building Safety Act, there was some changes after Grenfell. There's new legislation was brought in to protect people. So now what's come in is the non-domestic parts of multi-occupied residential buildings that will include communal areas, balconies, any structures, external walls, and the front doors on flats are now to be paid as part of the fire risk assessment when you go into a premises. This Section 156 came into effect on the 1st of October, so it's nearly 2 years ago, 2023. Um, it imposed these new duties on businesses where they must record a fire risk assessment and fire safety arrangements. So they must have an emergency plan as well. I have to say, we are finding people still have no idea what we're talking about when we go into a premises and say, have you got a fire risk assessment? Um, there is a requirement for responsible persons. They're basically people who manage premises, but you can also have accountable people. But I don't really want to go into that because it gets a little bit sort of confusing on that part. And I don't think it's something that you'll need to know. But there must be some cooperation and coordination between people. And in residential buildings with two or more domestic premises, they must now inform residents about any risks from fire and any fire safety measures that are put in there to keep them safe. So there should be like a little pack that they get. That is something that they should be doing. Next slide, please. So basically, a quick summary on the legislation. So there's now enhanced responsibilities for landlords from the 1st of October 2022. There's a greater emphasis now on ongoing alarm maintenance. So is actually the landlord that needs to be aware if obviously the tenant needs to report it, um, but the landlord has to do something if it's been reported to them promptly. And now a failure to comply will carry a significant penalty for the landlord. Next slide, please. So the kind of housing that these regulations apply to, these are all homes rented by private landlords. And as I mentioned, social housing has now come into that unless it's excluded, and unlicensed HMOs. The licensed HMOs normally, like with authorities, um, because they have their own regulations from the Housing Act, they don't actually come into it. So it is mainly down to the unlicensed HMOs now. Next slide, please. So the exclusions to the regulations. So obviously, if you're sharing the accommodation with the landlord or the landlord's family. Um, so long leases, which is a minimum of 6 months, um, and it's just the if you've got a tenant who's in a long lease, make sure they understand their responsibilities to check and replace if appropriate. So if it's beeping, it would be down because it's a long lease after 6 months and they're in a long term. They need to be able to check their batteries and make sure, so they will become responsible. Student halls of residence, hotels and refuges, care homes. It's quite obvious, really, like hospitals and hospices, low cost ownership homes, and any other accommodation relating to like sort of healthcare provision. They wouldn't have to like abide by these, but they would abide by different fire safety regulations. Next slide, please. Okay, so smoke alarms. There are a couple of different types that we tend to use in the community safety. If you could we could just go on to the next slide and I'll go through very quickly these different. So an ionization smoke detector, if you've got a fire that is developing very rapidly, so for argument's sake, something in a kitchen that's going off, an ionization smoke detector will pick that up. They use a very small amount of radioactive material. As I mentioned, they have a fast response to what would be small smoke particles coming from a fast, rapidly developing fire, but they can be a bit sensitive. If you've got like a sort of a smouldering fire, it won't pick it up as quickly. but the problem with those, they generally sit in halls that like by a kitchen door. So if somebody burns a bit of toast, you will probably find that where it'll be an ionization, it will set it off, because they are quite sensitive. They will also, because they will pick up rapidly developing fires, they will give the occupant quite a lot of time, to get out, because it will be an early response to a fire. Um, so as I mentioned, the disadvantages are you'll get the false alarms with them, and when people keep getting false alarms, they can tend to disable them, so that they stop having it, or they actually become almost like, oh, it's only the alarm. And so if an actual fire or the smoke detector is actually going off, they may not respond to it. So it is worth bearing that in mind. Um, so it, but they won't pick up. Say if someone was smoking in a flat, and they left and they dropped their cigarette and it was a slow smouldering one, it won't. It's unlikely that it will pick it up. Um, Next slide, please. So photoelectric. Now that will be your cigarette smoker. So that would be the one who that would pick up a smaller one. The, the the disadvantage with these is if it's a fast, rapidly developing fire, it's not going to pick it up. So people are going to it's going to be a later time for people to get out. And obviously, the earlier warning people get, the more chance there is that people will get out of a premises quite safely. Um, so you get fewer false alarms with them. So you've got to weigh up, the type of people that you've got in the property and the type of rooms you've got in the property and what people are doing as to where you would put the smoke alarms. Um, so yeah, they're just the two types that you can get. You'll also find with the smoke detectors, obviously because they're on the ceilings, you can get false alarms because you'll get creepy crawlies walking in there, and obviously dust can set them off as well. um, but I'll come on to the sort of maintenance a bit later. Next slide, please. So testing the smoke and heat alarms, realistically, you want to really show people, because in my experience, when I've been into people's houses, they don't always know what it is that's on the ceiling. Um, they won't actually know how to test it. And also, it would be able to show them. I mean, the amount of times you see people with a sort of like false alarm and they've got their teeth out and they're waving it, when in actual fact, if you push and hold the button, the test button, for about 10 seconds, it should reset, unless obviously you've still got the smoke going through. Um, with when you put up a smoke detector, there should be manufacturer's instructions on what to do and how to test it. We do say to people, please follow those, and for the landlord to show the tenant. So when the tenant moves in, is just actually go through it with them, and the same with the carbon monoxide as well, so that they know what the noise is. Because believe it or not, people are like, "What is that noise?" When you're testing an alarm, they don't even realise what it sounds like. So it's worth just going through to keep it safe. Um, Next slide, please. Um, yeah, additional alarms. I've put, if a kitchen is suitable, you can put in a heat detector. Heat detectors will work on, obviously, if there's an increased amount of heat, that you will get a heat detector that will go off. The chances are a smoke detector will go off before a heat detector will. Um, Also, where you place a heat detector, you don't actually want it anywhere near a cooker, because when you open a cooker, you're going to get this heat come out. Um, Also, try and avoid anywhere around a dishwasher, anything that creates steam or any form of heat. And it's also about the size of the kitchen as well. You can obviously get dual purpose alarms. I've seen them and I've heard them where they'll say fire, they'll say that the carbon monoxide's going off, um, and they will interchange between, depending on which particular head's being affected. Um, as I mentioned before, make sure you've got the correct smoke detector, um, and also it's installed in the right place in the property. You do not want to be installing them in corners, because of the way that smoke behavior. It could miss the corner, so it completely, you could have a fire, like a massive fire in your like lounge, and if it's not going into the corner, you're not going to know about it. Don't put them in recesses, and I have seen them on walls, but ideally you want it in the pretty much the center of the room, within reason, as long as you haven't got some sort of log burner or something that's going to affect it. Um, with the testing of them as well, if the tenant can't test it, it's good that the landlord, for example, if they're disabled in any way, then the landlord will need to arrange for somebody to go around and test it. These smoke detectors should be tested weekly. Um, so yeah, there's the other thing to note here as well is if there's link detection in a like a mains wired that's been installed in the premises, make sure if there's a problem with it, so they need to replace it, they're not putting in single point. It needs to be fitted like for like. So if they're taking out a mains wired, they need to put a mains wired back in again. Um, Next slide, please. We do appreciate it can be difficult for landlords. I've worked with a lot of social housing who, for whatever reason, they can't get access to the property to do maintenance. Um, it Sometimes it can be there's a hoarding issue, which ideally you do want to be getting smoke alarm maintenance, and probably substantially more smoke alarm installed in the premises. But it's it's down to the landlord really to make every sort of attempt possible to get in to do the maintenance and to make sure that everything is okay. Um, if need be, they should write to their tenants and let them know about the legal requirements for them to check the alarm, make sure the alarm's okay, and it's also for the tenant's safety. Um, and actually, you need to understand with the tenant why it's a problem for the landlord to get in, what the blockages are for the landlord. As I said before, with hoarders, it can be quite difficult because they don't want anybody in the property. So any sort of maintenance is nigh on impossible. But the landlord has to show that he's actually tried to get in, but they're not expected to go to court to do that, um, for the compliance. Um, yeah. Next slide, please. So the battery operated alarms, the manufacturer's guidance is every 10 years. They should be replaced, because they do degrade. As I mentioned, when they're on the ceiling, where people are cooking, where you'll get dust, smoke. As I mentioned, things go in there and quite possibly die. Um, so the wiring will degrade as well. They do need to be changed. I did have a couple of questions yesterday about, well, what if they're 10 years old and they're still working? That's ideally there's a reason why they're said for 10 years. Um, with the mains wired, I always say to people, you're probably better off changing the batteries annually, because the chances are when the battery goes, it's going to be 2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday, like on a well Saturday morning. And once you've heard a beeping smoke detector, you can't unhear it. You can push the test button and hold it for 10 seconds, and it should reset, which will probably give you a few hours. But if it's really in a problem or it's got a problem, then it won't. Um, so I say to people, if you change it on the 1st of January every year, you know it's pretty much that battery is going to get you through the year. And one of the reasons you'll get, it's the same as a car, it will go when it's cold and early morning because the temperature dips and the battery's lost power anyway. So it's trying to get its power. So it will lose it. It's like your car trying to start on a cold morning. It takes more power. So that's why you'll notice it probably in a winter's like 2 o'clock in the morning. Um, so you also, if you've got the dust and corrosion, as I mentioned, there is something you can do. We do when I was in community fire safety, we used to say to people, get a hoover if you can, and just hoover around the vents to try and pull out some of the dust to keep it, to stop you from getting the unwanted false alarms. And if you're having a mains wired, always get a qualified electrician in there to actually change the head. You don't necessarily need to change the whole base. They can actually change the head if it's not that old. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, it should be mains wired and interconnected. That's the standard required in our building regulations. Um, if the landlord uses a standalone battery powered one, um, if a local authority comes round, I mean, I didn't actually know this, they may require you to improve it because they have these housing health and safety rating system, um, which is a risk-based system. So they can go back, they can see what you've got in there, what you're doing, and then if they're not happy, they can then go back and get you to change things. I had absolutely no idea about this, so that was something I learned from this as well. So it's the landlords. You in a lot of respects, you are much better off doing the mains wired, um, because they are better quality really, and that's from my experience. Next slide, please. Carbon monoxide monitors, as we all know, they will save lives, and they do, and they perform better being fixed on a wall. They need to be about 15 centimeters away from the ceiling, and the same room as the possible source. I have before, when people have boilers upstairs, I've actually put it outside the door, right by the top of the door, like the gap at the top of the door, but they need to be about 1 to 3 meters away from the actual appliance. So, for example, if you've got a boiler in a kitchen, you were going to want it probably a couple of meters away from it and just down from the ceiling, to pick up if there's any issues with the boiler itself. Um, and in living rooms, obviously, if people have got a log burner or anything, you'll need to have one in there, or a gas fire as well. And it's sometimes, if you can't always do that, I do know people who've put them in by people like where they're sleeping, so that it will warn them if if they're sleeping. Um, but that is a must. You must have these CO monitors. Next slide, please. Obviously, fire doors are an essential part of passive fire protection. And the reason obviously is for the compartmentation. So if there's if you've got somebody who's got a block of flats and they've got, say, 3 or 4 people, it's making sure that, just have a quick look at their fire doors, and just making sure that there's no damage to them. um, and also, the if people have hearing issues, just bear in mind that if somebody's got their hearing aids on, they could hear like a smoke detector during the day. If they take their hearing aids out at night, they may not hear it. So there is stuff out there where you can get a vibrating pad and a flashing light which goes by the side of the bed, um, and the alarm links to that, so that if the alarm goes off, and you can also get them for the carbon monoxide as well, so you can get a whole setup, so it warns them if there's a fire, and obviously they would hear it. One of the things they do need to take into account is the Equality Act 2010. So it's for the tenants' needs and their evacuation requirements. So things like when you've got small children, the elderly, people with disabilities, it may be that they need extra smoke detection within the premises, just to cover them, to give them that early warning, because they're not going to be able to get out as quickly as somebody like yourselves or myself from a property. So it's making sure that they've got the adequate fire protection, basically, for the needs of the people, the tenants that are in there. Next slide, please. So, the landlord is making sure that they have smoke and CO alarms and working, and it's not an option. It is a legal duty. and they should be doing that. I mean, it's a moral thing as well, but it is a legal duty now. As I mentioned, and obviously being in the fire service, the earlier detection, the more chance there is people getting out safely. Um, there is a reduce of risk and damage to the property, and it will protect the landlord. And it is really simple to comply. It's not rocket science, if you like. It's quite easy for people to put up smoke detectors. Um, and normally, when you get the information from the manufacturer, it will tell you where to put it. And there is a lot of information out there from fire services websites, instructions on where to put them. Next slide, please. So I think when I was talking to Stuart, it's the checklist that I think you inventory clerks need to know is making sure that the landlord is aware of fitting alarms before a new tenancy begins to make sure that these alarms are working. Include alarm checks. So when they go in or when you go in, is making sure that the smoke detectors work and the carbon monoxide alarms, checking the dates on them. The landlord has to act promptly when the faulty alarm is raised. They have to come out and do something, and keeping records of installation and maintenance. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. So just make sure that you can cover yourselves on that one. Next slide, please. Yeah, I've just put some related legislation. So you've obviously got the Housing Act, the Fire Safety Act 2021, and our Building Safety Act 2022. Some of them are worth, it's just having a quick look at just to kind of familiarize yourself. I mean, it's quite dry, but there are some salient points in there. Next slide, please. There we go.
Okay, so thank you very much for that, Michelle. There's a couple of points there that I didn't know, so that's really good. So we've had some questions in. Naturally, I made an entirely unenforced error at the start. I said if you can put questions into the chat box, of course, chat is not shown on webinars. If you can put them into the Q&A box, please. But we've had some questions in. First thing is a couple of people have picked up that there's a bit of a typo in there where it said CO2 and not CO. So carbon
Yeah.
monoxide is CO. CO2 is carbon dioxide, which you use to make your drinks fizzy in the pub. I say CO2 all the time for no apparent
SCO,
reason.
yeah.
It just trips off the tongue, doesn't it? I don't know why that is, but so I just wanted to make that clear for
I was
everyone.
probably looking at fire
Everyone watching.
extinguishers.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose you're using both all the time, aren't you? So it's
Yeah,
easy.
my apologies. My apologies.
So Dale has asked, is it worth using the fire pens to test alarms?
Is that the ones that go? Is Graham here?
Do you know what? Let me have another look. Graham, put your hand up if you're here. I don't see it.
No. Is that
No.
the one? So the fire pens, are they the ones that? Because some alarms, I've seen people go round and they've got this thing that they stick up,
Hmm.
and then they set it off. Um, I mean, to be honest, I just test them. I just poke them, and just see what they do. I mean, I don't necessarily know that you'd need a fire pen to actually do that. Um, if I'm really honest.
I think in
Um,
terms of legislation for the landlords, I don't think they're required to do that. They're required to test for power and an audible sound, but that's, I think, as far as it goes. But
yeah, I've not come across that in the legislation.
perhaps when you see Graham, perhaps he can
Yeah,
confirm that, and we'll put that
yeah,
out.
I'll put that out. Yeah. So fire
Awesome.
pens, do they need to be tested with fire pens? Let me write this down.
Cool. I think you have covered this, but just to go over this, Ant Stevens has asked, are battery-powered alarms acceptable?
They are acceptable, in 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 a lot of respects. You can get like wireless linked ones. I would strongly, and I can't say this strongly enough, get into linked ones. You can get, as I say, they're wireless ones. You just buy them, and you put them up in one room and you put them up in another, probably not so much a flat, probably more a house, um, where so if you've got one downstairs and then you've got one upstairs, you may not, if you sleep soundly, you may not hear the one downstairs, or it may be going off for a while before you actually hear it. Whereas if you've got one upstairs, that's going to wake you up fairly promptly. Um, so yes, you can. But as I say, I would strongly advise that you have an interlinked system, because you know they are more beneficial. And what you don't want is, you know, you've got to protect, life really. And the last thing you want is to be in a coroner's court and saying, well, actually, I thought I'd just stick up. It is a You see, they say it's a minimum on each story, which is habitable and living. um, from from my experience, the earliest that people get the information, as in a fire, um, the more chance there is. I mean, obviously, you've got this whole thing with lithium-ion batteries now, where people are storing e-scooters, and if they go off, if people have got them in the hall and they go off, you're going to be in all sorts of trouble. And if you've got an interlinked alarm, at least it's going to go off upstairs. It's going to give you half a chance. Um, so I would strongly advise, but yes, you can get battery ones. Is the long and the short of it.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Here's a good one from Lisa. This is something we're seeing a lot more nowadays. So if a boiler is in a loft and we don't inspect lofts and
hmm
CO2 is in the loft, what are we meant to do as we can't test?
I mean, the thing is, you can, potentially, it's not a living area, um, and also the problem with that as well. Smoke detectors don't like, it sort of like when it's really hot, and they don't like it when it's really cold, which is why you tend not to find people put too many smoke detectors in their lofts, and they're also very dusty, and there's a lot of spiders and things up there. Um, So yeah, I mean, they you get a lot of false alarms with them. I mean, people are having to do it now because of solar panels and having like, battery packs up there. But you can actually, if you where the loft hatch is, potentially you could put a carbon monoxide alarm by the loft hatch. So if it starts to come down, then it would get a warning sort of quite promptly. Um, if that's what you desire to do. I mean, I have done that in properties before when I was in doing the community safety, but it's difficult, having things sort of all over houses now, and people don't want boilers, particularly in the kitchen, because they take space. Um, so you're finding that more and more often. But yeah, I certainly would look at, having one by the loft hatch. I will check with Graham if there's anything else that he would suggest. So zero alarms in loft with boiler.
Cool, thank you. Question from Sarah. Just to confirm, you don't need a CO alarm for gas fires or oil
Yes, you do.
boilers. You do.
Yes, you do. Any It's although it said solid, it used to be say solid fuel. What they've done is they've said a fixed combustion appliance. So a gas, sorry, yes, a gas. So you've got a gas boiler. You've got some people I know have ranges and they have stuff coming out of there. Anything that produces, like if you've got fossil fuel, will produce CO, like carbon monoxide. So yes, you do. The only things it excludes, funny enough, are gas cookers.
Which it's always struck me as a little bit odd that
Yeah.
you need to do it for a gas
Mm,
fire, but not for a gas cooker.
yeah.
Um,
So yeah.
okay. Sarah's asked, that's it's quite an interesting one. Does everyone else look at the dates on alarms because they're quite hard to see sometimes? I wonder if perhaps you could
Take a picture.
just. Yeah, good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there.
Not I'm a gentleman of limited stature, so normally
Yeah,
what I'll do is I'll hold my camera up high and take a photo. But actually, a lot of the time they're really, really old units and they haven't even got a
yeah.
date on them.
No, if that's the case, then the chances are it's well out of date anyway. Um, because they should have the little ticket on them that gives them the expiry.
Hmm.
So yeah, I used to, if I couldn't always see, I'd use my camera on my phone, and zoom in and try and take a photo of it.
So I've got a question from the snappily titled 716431. If a smoke alarm is on the stairwell wall, does it cover the hall and landing?
No.
Cool. That was easy enough.
Shouldn't be on the wall either. Should be on the
No.
ceiling.
And I think it's worth saying, because the reason you put smoke detectors on the ceiling is because heat and smoke barrel upwards.
Yeah.
They collect at the ceiling, whereas a CO alarm should be more or less where the person is, or where the head is in the room, because
Or at
CO
least slightly
doesn't do
higher.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause it kind of goes in waves as well, carbon monoxide. And if I just want to get my, um, I'm sure someone will correct me, but it's heavier, I think. So it comes down and will
Mm.
fill a room. So that's why you want it slightly above the head, because actually you don't want it going off when you're already breathing it in.
Yeah. Yeah. Another one from Sarah. Testing alarms is important. Is there a legal requirement to test them at certain points?
I don't think it's a legal. I mean, it's a legal requirement for maintaining it. I mean, we used to just give advice to test. We used to say like have a test it Tuesday, um, and people would test the alarms. I don't think it's a legal requirement for them to test it, but ideally, what you want is people to get into that habit. I will check that, but from my understanding, from reading the legislation, um, they in some ways they kind of put the onus on the tenant as well to actually do something, but realistically that landlord should be testing it, because ultimately, again, if you're in front of a coroner's court and you're saying, well, when did you last test it? Oh, I haven't tested it for 2 years. Yeah. um it's that kind of thing. So I will check that, but I'm pretty sure it's not a legal requirement.
Cool. Um, yeah, and a point from Rowley here. It's a legal duty for alarms to be fitted, but is it a legal requirement for each alarm to be dated? Many alarms I inspect are undated.
um if you're looking at battery ones, sometimes they're not. Most mains ones that, when they're fitted now, do have an expiry on them. And no, it's not a legal requirement for them to, because to be perfectly honest, they come from all over the world, and specific places generally when they're cheap.
Hmm.
And generally they don't have dates on them unless it's on the box, because sometimes it'll actually be on the box. So if it's been put up, obviously the people haven't kept the box, and they probably haven't kept a note of it either. Um,
Yeah, that's a good point. Some of the electricians that I come across, they just get a Sharpie and write it on, and I always think that's a
yeah,
sensible thing to do.
yeah, they should do, because there should be a little box, from the mains ones that actually on the side that tells them, um, when it's fitted.
Mm. Yeah.
Bear in mind as well, when it's actually kind of come out, when you buy it, it could have been sitting in the shop for 2 years, so you haven't got 10 years really. Realistically, you've got 8.
Mm. Yeah, that's a very good point. Um,
So yeah, have a look at the when you're buying them. Have a look at the box, because it will give you it should give you a date on it.
so, question from Anonymous. Properties with really high ceilings, can you confirm who is responsible for testing, the landlord or the tenant?
Ultimately, it depends if it's a long lease. As I mentioned, with the long leases, the tenant would be. Um, we have had this issue with actually how do we get the, um, fire alarm or the smoke detector up there, and I've had to. I mean, I'm in a fortunate position where I've been able to get the crew down. Um, I mean, potentially that's, it, it would be the landlord, because it's their responsibility, because it's their property. If the tenant can't test it, then the landlord should kick in, um, and test it.
Yeah, good point. I do come across these occasionally where there are these massive high ceilings and you can't get anywhere
Yeah.
near them without a
No.
massive long pole.
Yeah.
Um, there's a really good one here, which is one of my bugbears. It's from Anonymous again. So 80% of the time when I find a CO alarm in a cupboard where the boiler is, the alarm is closer than 2 meters and sitting on top of the boiler itself. Does this mean it's not compliant and we should advise landlords it needs to be moved?
Realistically, yeah. Um, it's I mean I I've found CO monitors all over the place. Um, I don't like them in the cupboard with the boiler. Um, I like them, as I said to you, I've put them on the door, or the sort of like the frame around, um, because if you put it just above where there's always a gap in top of the door, where the boiler is, um, and I tend to put it up there, um, but it's not compliant, if that makes sense, because they've got one.
Right. So the law says they should have one, but it doesn't
Yeah,
mandate where they should have it.
no.
Got
It's
it.
the same as smoke detectors. The law says they should have smoke detectors, but it doesn't say what type of smoke detectors they must have.
Right. That makes complete sense. Um, that was unnecessary sarcastic, wasn't it?
No, no, I know. Tell me about it.
Um, so good question from Lloyd here. So how have you found the new combined alarms, e.g. carbon monoxide and heat? Are they necessarily less efficient than specialist alarms?
Um, I think it depends who makes it. To be perfectly honest with you, AIICO are very good. Um, the um, uh, the only thing I'm not too keen on with those is that they're on the ceiling, and I don't particularly like a CO monitor on the ceiling. Um, but I would say they're as effective as other alarms. Um, Again, as I say, it depends what make you buy. There are some makes that are better than others.
Gotcha. So just going through these, CO alarm required for internal oil-fired boiler. Yes, we've covered that.
Hmm.
To clarify, we need a CO alarm for all gas appliances. And yes, apart from a gas hob or a gas
Cooker.
cooker.
Yep.
Let's have a look. Just going through these. Um, There are alarms that provide a separate button to test wirelessly for high ceilings. Thank you, Sally. That would be very useful in some of the properties I've been to. I
Mm.
have got one question, and I might be being a bit unfair on this, but
Go
it's
on.
been bugging me. So I went to a property a little while ago, and it was a 17th century house.
Hmm.
And they bought the chapel next door at some point during the life of this house, and they'd extended and done this, that, and the other and moved things about. So what you had was a central staircase, and they had a smoke alarm on each floor. So it
Hmm.
was relatively compliant, which is great. And on one of the half landings, they had a tiny door which went into the chapel. And there was this massive chapel with a big high ceiling. And the argument the landlord used to me for not having a smoke detector in that room was that it wasn't a separate floor. So was he right?
Um, I mean, I'm assuming they had building regs. Well, how long ago was this?
Well, I went in there about a month ago, but when they bought the chapel, it could have been 100 years ago. That's
Um,
that's the problem with these very old properties.
yeah. Um, is so when you go into the chapel, is that actually used as a another sort of residential area then?
Yes. Yeah.
So you go
Well, it's a reception room for the main house.
right, and what's in there?
Well, lots of furniture, a big original fire, sort of with a multi-fuel in there. So a big old place.
Yeah, I would say from a safety perspective, if there's a fire in there, it's going to be a long old time before that smoke detector is going to be going off in the hallway, from the smoke coming through there. Um, from what you're saying, um, if I was visiting, I would probably strongly advise them to have a smoke detector fitted in there. Um, I mean, if it's that's when I said, like, at the beginning, about large properties and complicated layouts, quite often you will need it's kind of, although they're saying it's a minimum of one, and they say ideally and all this, um, there are reasons why you would have, um, more smoke detectors put in. Potentially, you've got two buildings there, um, that have been, albeit they're put into one, they are two separate buildings. In
Yes.
So that would be my argument with it. That actually these are two separate buildings. Um, is he renting it out?
Yeah.
Is it like an Airbnb or something like that?
No, no, it's a
It's
six
a
month.
proper. It's
Yeah.
a 6 month rental.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I would. Yeah, because the fact of the matter is, if you've got people living in there and they're in that other, because it sounds quite large, if you've got a smoke detector, and it's always assuming that they're going to hear it, because you know um my answer to that question would be, yeah, I would, but you can't force them to do it. And yes, I know what you're saying, but to me that's a separate building.
Mm.
Albeit he's got the door and they've put it in, and they would have had building regs to have done that, I would imagine, because they were two separate
I
buildings in the first place.
Yeah, I suspect it was done a long, long time ago. And the reason I'm saying this is because Graham has joined us. Thank you,
Oh,
Graham.
hello, Graham.
And he's put a comment in the questions and answer. It says, if it forms part of the means of escape, then it should have detection. And when I think back to it, there was no other way out of that room apart from the tiny little door on the landing.
Mm,
So it,
yeah.
it, it definitely wouldn't have complied with building regs. So it was done a long time ago. Anyway, I'm conscious of the fact that time marches on. I really appreciate the answers to those questions. They've cleared up a lot for us. Oh, just a quick one. Anonymous says, can you repeat? Do you have to have an alarm for an oil boiler? Yes, you do.
Yes,
Absolutely.
you do.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle and Graham, for joining us. That's been really useful for me, and hopefully for our attendees as well. And yes, we'll get back to you guys with any of the questions we couldn't answer during that section.
Yep. Perfect.
Okay, so just a quick bit on should you provide alarms. Now, in my business, we provide alarms for agents and landlords. We do it as part of our business model, but also as part of a service, I guess, for the people that we're working for. There's positives and negatives to this, I would say, and really it's down to your type of business and what you want to do. So just looking at the negatives then, well, for a start, you've got to buy them and you've got to hold stock, which means that, you're going to have to spend out probably a substantial amount of money on stock you've got no idea that you're going to sell. You've got to carry it, which is fine for me because we've got a rural business. We're all driving everywhere. So having a few alarms in the back of our car doesn't matter at all. But I know that a lot of you are London based or Manchester based and you work on public transport. So carrying stock around in a bag is probably a bit of a pain. You've got to fit them. Well, you've got the information you need to fit them, but the truth of the matter is that a lot of the time ceilings are quite high. It means you probably have to carry a ladder or something. And again, if you're on public transport, that's just not practical. You've also got an added possible liability. I called my insurance company when we were first thinking about doing this and asked if we were covered, and they said yes, as long as it's part of your business model that we've insured you for, and you've said it on your proposal forms, then we cover you. So there's no liability as far as that's concerned. The only thing I would say is if you screw a smoke detector to a 16th century beam or a rare piece of furniture, then, you know, that's an entirely different matter. And as Michelle said in her presentation there, you can't go backwards. So if a property has wired linked smoke alarms in there, you can't then just put a battery smoke alarm in. And wired alarms have to be done by a qualified electrician. So there are some instances where you can't do anything. You just have to report that that the alarms aren't working or aren't compliant. But there are positives, obviously. First of all, it's a welcome source of income. Now, you're not going to get rich providing CO detectors and smoke alarms. But having said that, I prefer to adopt the Team Sky mentality of business, which is small increments or little wins rather than looking for a silver bullet. So, you know, you might earn £10, £15 on a visit, but that's all profit for you. So it's worth doing, I think. One of the things I would say is I did in fact, it was the 16th century house, fully enough. I went in there, and in this massive property, they had two smoke alarms, both of which must have been at least 35 years old, neither of which worked. They had four multi-fuel burners in different rooms. They had an oil boiler in a utility, and it was over 3 floors. So I actually made quite a lot of money on that. I made more money on the smoke detectors than I did from the inspection, I think. It provides a useful service. I think this is one of the things that stops a lot of people doing this, is the fact they think that agents and landlords will get annoyed because you're trying to earn money from it. But actually, I've got several agents that love this, and they split down into two different types. I've got corporates who basically cannot be bothered, and they just like the fact that they don't have to put out another works order. I can just fit it and include it on my invoice. And I've got very small agents that really don't want to spend the time to understand the rules and compliance, just because they haven't got the time, they haven't got the resources. So generally speaking, they're really happy that we do this. Then I've got a big bunch of people in the middle, your everyday agents. Some of them like it. Some of them say, no, we don't want you to do it because we earn money doing that. And that's fine too. No one's ever been funny with me. Everyone's been happy that I've asked. It makes you more of a one-stop shop. And what I mean by this is that your agent isn't having to phone somebody else to get them to do a job. So the more you become part of their business model, the less likely they are to go and find another inventory provider. And you're probably cheaper. I was a bit cheeky. I asked a couple of agents how much they were paying for these. And they paid their electricians. Yeah, and fair play to the electricians. If you can get it, do it. But for battery alarms, they were charging 70 quid a unit. Which is, I think, is quite expensive. Well, we're a lot cheaper than that. So, you know, they're quite happy with that. What I also like is that they do reinforce the benefit of midterm inspections, because you've put them in on a specific date. You can report when they need to be replaced, and you can also report on them when you're doing your midterms. Midterms are a great source of income for us. They're really, really useful. So if you're not doing midterms, we have got in the not too distant future some training coming up, I think, on midterms, which might be helpful for you. So at the end of the day, my take on this is that this might be useful for you, for your business model. Some people don't like to do it. That's entirely a matter for you. We do it largely for the service aspect, I guess, rather than the making money. But the money's sort of a bit of a, I guess, a bit of a compensation for carrying around 20 CO alarms. Okay, so we're at the end of today's presentation. Thank you very much again for everyone turning up. We've got some upcoming events for you, which may be helpful for you. We've got another webinar coming up in September. Now, what we've done is we've brought this forward from October, so apologies for the short notice. My fellow board member, Lloyd, pointed out to me that There's some employment law changes coming in very shortly. And we probably ought to get ahead of the game on this. So we've got an HR advisor who's going to do a webinar on the employment law changes and various other bits and pieces about HR. Now, if you employ people, this will be useful. If you're thinking about employing people, it will be useful. But also, if you use associates, it might be worth dipping into this, because there are rules about using self-employed people as part of your business. That's on the 11th of September. We're doing that at 1 p.m. This is part of the testing of different times. A lot of people have told us they prefer it around lunchtime, so they can just sit in with a sandwich, watch a webinar, and then go on with their day. On the 23rd September, this is a new thing for us. We're starting networking sessions. Our first test session is in the southeast. It'll be held in Crawley. The venue to be advised once we know how many people are going to turn up to that. So we're going to be sending out an invitation very soon. Really, this is a case of giving people something where they can talk to a live person, because let's be honest, most of the time we're either spending our time in an empty house talking to ourselves or talking to our dictaphone, or we're driving between empty houses. And it's a chance to take along, your issues, have a chat with them in complete confidence, and ideally get some ideas from other clerks and form a bit of a network. So we will be sending out an invitation for that very shortly. 25th of September, we're doing another webinar on lone working. This is going to be about keeping yourself safe if you're a lone worker. It's also important if you employ people. It'll give you some ideas about what you should be doing to keep your people safe and well. Well, thank you very much for attending again. It's been really good. The number of participants has gone up quite a lot since we've started out. But if you're watching this on demand, then thank you also for dipping in. We're going to be sending out recording and download links to everybody who's registered. I said that this is kind of a suck it and see thing, really, in as much as we're trying to find out what things are useful for people. So if you think there's some areas where you might value a webinar or some learning opportunities, please do get in touch, send us an email, and we'll look at what we can do in the future. There'll be a survey once we close the webinar. If you could fill it in, that'd be great. And there's also a box there for you to put any ideas for future things in the future. And if you would like, please do send any thoughts and observations to myself, chairperson at the AIIC. Always happy to hear feedback, good and bad, however it may come. So once again, thank you very much for attending. Hope you have a great day, and look forward to seeing you on the next session.